President-elect Donald Trump is being sentenced in his New York criminal conviction. Last night, the Supreme Court refused to stop the sentencing. Judge Juan Merchan has already signaled that Trump will not face jail time or probation. Regardless of the outcome, the president-elect will become the first president convicted of a felony. I want to bring in Jessica Levinson for more on this. She's a CBS News legal contributor and a professor at Loyola Law School. Jessica, what do we expect? I mean, given that there will be no penalties, what do you expect to hear from the judge?
Maybe an explanation again of why there will be no penalties. And let's be honest that President Trump's legal team has been incredibly successful in pushing the sentencing to this point. They, of course, did request the delay and pushing it to the point where it is not practicable to have any sentence other than what we're going to see here, which is an unconditional release. Vlad, you know this. This is the proverbial slap on the wrist. It is symbolic. It is an acknowledgement that there was a conviction, and it is essentially no more. Unconditional means that. No conditions, no strings attached. The president will not have to obviously serve any jail time, check in with a probationary officer. And what we can expect is essentially for the judge to say, I heard the prosecution, I heard the defense. Here is why I'm handing down this particular sentence. Some judges like to give their reasoning from the bench more than others, given the historic moment. It will be interesting to see how much of his reasoning Judge Merchan wants to provide to all of us.
And just, I guess the question for a lot of people, Jessica, will be, what could that reasoning possibly be? Is it a political one? Is it a legal one? What do you think?
Well, I think it's an acknowledgement of reality, and maybe there's a better way of phrasing that, but it's an acknowledgement that this defendant is about to occupy the Oval Office, is about to be the head of the executive branch. It's January 10th. The inauguration is January 20th, and we are here for a variety of different reasons, but the idea that you could put the president behind bars, the idea that you could put any sort of serious conditions on the head of the executive branch, I think raises some significant practical and legal questions. President Trump's legal team has brought the legal theory that this sentencing alone could interfere with the president's ability to take care to faithfully execute the laws. That's the language from the Constitution, as you know, Vlad. So anything more than this symbolic sentence, and I think you have a more significant argument that there would be potentially some interference with the president's ability to do his job. Vlad, I know you know this, when it comes to questions of presidential immunity, we do wrap a bubble around the president. And I'm not just talking about the Supreme Court decision from last term. I'm talking about all the way back to the Nixon administration, where there's an acknowledgement that, yes, no person is above the law, but actually the president of the United States, we need to essentially protectively bubble wrap them so they can do what they need to do. And I think that's what part of what we might hear from the judge today.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because I was thinking as I was listening to you that would this mean that there is a legal precedent for someone else, an ordinary American citizen who has been convicted of a crime, to right now there are restrictions in some states on who can do what when you have a criminal conviction on your record. They range from employment to a variety of different things that you cannot do if you have a criminal record. I wonder if there's a way to use a legal to make a legal argument that if the president of the United States, which by the way, the founding fathers, as you know, wanted the presidency. The president is the commander in chief is a civilian. In other words, he is an ordinary citizen, yes, tasked with enormous power, but still a citizen, not a military leader, not a monarch. So I wonder if there's a way to suggest that if I have a criminal record for something, that I should use what the precedent is being set here with President-elect Trump.
If I ever find myself on the wrong side of the law, I think I want you as my attorney, because I love the idea that we could potentially use this as an argument for other people. What I would say is, as somebody who teaches all those presidential immunity and all the executive privilege cases, I think this really is confined to the president. It doesn't mean that smart lawyers won't try and make the argument that you have laid out today. It means that when it comes to all of those other people who cannot do things, who restrictions are put on them by virtue of the convictions, we're basically okay with that. You're exactly right that there was a fear when it came to the founding fathers of giving the president and frankly anyone else too much power, right? That's why we have three branches. That's why in other Western democracies, there's two branches. We disperse power because we feared the concentration of power. Having said that, again, go back to the Nixon administration, go back to the Watergate tapes cases, go back to another case where President Nixon was essentially sued for wrongful termination. And you'll see the Supreme Court saying over and over again, it's something about the president. We need to protect him because unlike a member of Congress, he is really acting alone in many cases, and we can't have him distracted. We can't have his ability to do his job undermined. So that's ultimately where I would come down on the constitutional question that you raise.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And the judge just now, Jessica, while you were speaking, has said this, and I'm quoting here, it is the legal protections afforded to the office of the President of the United States that are extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. So break that. It's essentially what Judge Merchan is saying is sort of what you just broke down for us.
This is something that you hear from lawyers and judges a lot, which is when it comes to protecting the president, it is not protecting Barack Obama or Joe Biden or Donald Trump. It is protecting whoever is in the Oval Office because they serve us. And it's in part why there's this division between the Office of Legal Counsel and a president's personal attorneys, for instance, where you see Judge Merchan saying and having to acknowledge that he is looking at a defendant who is about to, again, be head of the executive branch. He is looking at a defendant who will enjoy many protections that, Vlad, you and I do not by virtue of that fact. And so he's saying clearly, this isn't about protecting a private individual. It's about protecting that office. And it is a clear and I think important statement from the judge.
So, Jessica, just stand by. We're going to continue our discussion, but we expect a CBS News special report will take place because the judge has just wrapped up, Jessica. And so I may end up cutting you off, or I may end up cutting myself off once that special report comes to air. But again, it does seem, and I think this is an interesting point that you're making and the judge is reinforcing, which is that I think when people talk about what has happened to the president-elect, they always reference it in terms of the man, the individual. Well, President-elect Donald Trump got away with it, or he is not being held accountable for his actions. And in this case, and in the way that you've described it, and what the judge appears to be also suggesting is you have to distance the office of the presidency from the individual.
Well, that's right. And I mean, this is a situation where I was just struck by the fact that if you listen to the prosecution and then listen to the defense and the very different narratives that they tell about this case, that's essentially how we see a lot of things in America in 2025 now. Yeah. And I understand we're going to special report.
We are, Jessica. Thank you very, very much for your time as always. As we just indicated, the judge has ruled unconditional discharge for President-elect in New York. Stand by for CBS News special report.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell, and we are coming on the air as President-elect Donald Trump is sentenced in the so-called hush money case. The judge just sentenced Trump to an additional discharge for his 34 felonies unanimously decided by a New York jury. And it's an unconditional discharge, to be clear. Trump spoke virtually from his Mar-a-Lago resort saying, quote, "This has been a very terrible experience. I think it has been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system." He later added, "The fact is, I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong." Now, just as a reminder, the president-elect was convicted in May of last year on charges related to payments to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. That was all up in the lead up to the 2016 election. This today formalizes Trump's status as a convicted felon and makes him the first to carry that title into the White House. Trump and his lawyers had tried tirelessly to delay today's proceedings, taking their appeal all the way to the Supreme Court. Then we heard from the Supreme Court last night, and they ruled in a 5-4 decision that the sentencing could take place today, including 2 of the conservative justices siding with 3 in the liberal wing of the Supreme Court. I want to bring in our congressional correspondent, Scott McFarland. And Scott, what does unconditional discharge mean?
It means this case is over. It has been wrapped up. That's the final chapter in this story. And what the judge says in explaining the unconditional discharge is that a prison sentence or a further sentence would serve no practical purpose. It wouldn't do any good. That's the type of thing, Nora, we'd see when there's a major health concern for a defendant or a geriatric defendant, somebody who couldn't be reasonably put in prison or put on probation and serve any ends.
I want to bring in our chief election and campaign correspondent, Robert Costa. Trump appearing virtually from Mar-a-Lago and once again strongly defending himself.
He did strongly defend himself, Nora, but we see from the president-elect defiance at this moment and disregard for the criminal conviction. He will continue to appeal it. He's unhappy with the Supreme Court, but there is a sense, based on my reporting inside Trump's inner circle, that this conviction and this unconditional sentencing will not be a burden on his presidency once he takes office later this month.
I bring in CBS News legal contributor and criminal defense attorney Caroline Polisi. She is with us. And Caroline, I just want to point out what the prosecutor said heading into this. His name is Joshua Steinglass. He blasted Trump before this sentencing, saying that rather than expressing any remorse for his criminal acts, that Trump has spread disdain for our institutions and the rule of the law. He said the defendant has caused enduring damage to public perception of the criminal justice system and placed officers of the court in harm's way. The president's attorney responding, I very, very much disagree. So, Caroline, I do want to ask you, what does this mean, though, in terms of the legal precedent, if any, that it sets?
Yeah, that's right, Nora. In a lot of ways, this was just a procedural bookend and really some legal theater in that it is very rare for both the prosecution and the defense to know in advance of sentencing that the sentence will be an unconditional discharge, which essentially is exactly what it sounds like. It's not even a slap on the wrist. There is no jail time, obviously, but no fines, no conditions, no restitution, no, community service, even nothing being imposed here. And so really you saw the prosecutor Steinglass just getting on the record Trump's disdain for the rule of law. But, we talk a lot about whether or not Trump is above the law. And I think today really solidified the fact that he is, in that the Supreme Court enshrined this idea of presidential immunity. We talked when he was convicted in this case. We were debating whether or not jail time would be imposed, but I don't think anybody thought that there would be this unconditional discharge after he was elected. All of a sudden, this is what is happening. And so, as noted, this case is not over. He will continue to exercise his appellate rights.
Caroline, I have to ask you because Judge Merchan, in issuing that unconditional discharge, said he does that because he has to do it without encroaching on the highest post in the land. Does that negate at all that the president-elect now becomes the only president to have been sentenced on criminal charges?
Yeah, look, it's a huge deal symbolically. This was a win for the Manhattan DA's office, but in a lot of senses, it was a Pyrrhic victory. Look, one hallmark of the criminal justice system is retribution, and that was not done here. However, for now, at least, his conviction is sort of enshrined procedurally. He will remain a convicted felon while in office. There's, nothing that bars him from holding office while being a convicted felon. And again, I think, the headline that SCOTUS refused to stop this proceeding today, the lead there really is that it was a 5-4 decision. And they indicated that these issues, these evidentiary issues regarding potential presidential immunity could and potentially would be taken up on appeal. So signaling there that, they were open potentially to the fact of reviewing this case and certainly could get back to the Supreme Court.
That's a really interesting and important point. Caroline, I want to bring in CBS's Katrina Kaufman. She has followed this trial in its entirety. She was inside the courthouse today. Now she's outside the courthouse for us. And give us some of the color of what we saw inside.
Nora, it's great to join you. It was such a unique experience in there because the courtroom was filled with all of the familiar faces of the court reporters, of the sketch artists, but Trump and his attorney, Todd Blanche, were presented on a screen to us. One of his attorneys, Emil Bovee, was in the courtroom, but this was an allowance that they made for Donald Trump, also to lessen the burden of the sentencing on him. It played a role in the Supreme Court, even allowing this to move forward. It was also remarkable to hear Trump speak on his own behalf, but in such a different way than you would normally hear a defendant speak at his own criminal trial. Usually that's to express remorse, to try to explain their actions. Trump sat there and really just defended himself, continued to proclaim his innocence and the injustice of this trial.
Katrina Kaufman, thank you. And Robert Costa, this is still a truly unprecedented, historic making movement because the president-elect is going to be inaugurated just 10 days from now. And even though it was virtual, he was in a courtroom today.
So while this procedure today can seem like a bit of a whimper, not a bang, legally speaking, historically, it is so notable. Just think, Nora, months ago, I was speaking with you. I was at the courtroom when then former President Trump was sentenced in New York in late May. He was at his political bottom. He looked like he was not going to win the presidency. People inside the Republican Party said we now have a convict who's going to be our nominee at the convention. It looked bleaker than ever for Trump. Now here we are in January 2025. Scott has done such great work on the January 6th investigations at the federal level. That has fallen away for the most part, not moving forward with prosecution. Same when it comes to classified records. And Trump, instead of losing the election in the wake of a conviction, is now the president-elect of the United States, has declared he has a mandate and has Republican majorities on Capitol Hill. Such a turnaround in American history in less than a year.
But, Scott, this is not the end of the president's legal troubles or reporting or reports coming out about his legal troubles, right?
By the end of the day today, we could get the final report of what special counsel Jack Smith found in his investigation of efforts to overturn the 2020 elections. An appeals court in Atlanta could free up the attorney general to release that today. Many people have been interested in reading what Jack Smith found, perhaps more than what he put in his charging documents. And Nora, one footnote. The defense attorney for Donald Trump today in that virtual hearing was Todd Blanche. That is going to be Donald Trump's nominee to be the #2 official at the Justice Department beginning this year.
And that is a very crucial post at the Attorney General's office and in the Justice Department. Thank you, Robert Costa, Scott McFarlane, also to Caroline Polisi and Katrina Kaufman. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and then tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell.
All right, folks, you've been watching a CBS News special report anchored by CBS Evening News and anchor, managing editor of the Evening News, Nora O'Donnell. If you're just joining us, Judge Juan Merchan has ruled an unconditional discharge in the New York hush money criminal trial of President-elect Donald Trump. I want to bring in Jessica Levinson for more on this. She's a CBS News legal contributor and a professor at Loyola Law School. So, Jessica, the judge said it is the legal protections afforded to the office of the president that are extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. Your take on what we just saw in New York City?
I think what we just saw is a judge acknowledging reality, that he is not facing any criminal defendant or a convicted criminal. In fact, he is facing the former and, more importantly, future president of the United States. And Vlad, as we've been talking about, that is a person who, by virtue of the office that they inhabit, not by virtue of who they are, but by virtue of their job, they enjoy protections. They enjoy protections from being sued civilly for official conduct. They enjoy protections from criminal liability for criminal liability for official conduct. And what we're seeing here is, of course, that extends to any real potential sentence that the judge is not going to say, I will be the person who puts strings and restrictions on the occupant of the Oval Office. Again, because of how our Constitution is structured, because of all of that case law indicating that we need to protect the office of the presidency.
So, Jessica, stand by. I want to bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. She's in West Palm Beach. I know this just happened, Weijia, but are you hearing any indication that we will expect to hear from the president-elect today on what just transpired in a New York City courtroom?
Vlad, you're right that it just wrapped up, and we did hear from Trump inside that proceeding. As for whether he'll make remarks today, you just never know when you're talking about Trump, and he could very well feel like adding more to what he said inside the courtroom, because we know this has been hanging over him. In fact, he made remarks about it last night, trying to downplay the sentencing, saying that he actually agreed with the Supreme Court's decision not to block the sentencing, because he says the justices mentioned that he could appeal, which is exactly what he plans to do. But he also said that, he's going to go and do his, quote, little thing today, meaning show up during the proceeding, and that his political opponent, Marchand, in this case, the judge, would be able to have, quote, fun with him. And so he tried to brush it off in his words, Vlad, but his actions, of course, spoke much louder, because he did try to stop this sentencing from happening, because even though he doesn't have to pay a penalty, this does now solidify him as a convicted felon. This will now be part of his criminal record forever. And so when he talked about appealing, he said he would do it. And he said that even though he doesn't have to pay any consequences or penalties, he's doing it, quote, psychologically, Vlad. So it's really interesting that he spoke about this last night and used that word to describe why he is going to contest this, because he knows in his mind that he is a convict. And so, as to answer your original question, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we did hear more from President-elect Trump today here in West Palm Beach.
All right, Weijia Jiang for us, reporting from West Palm Beach. Thank you, Weijia, as always. We appreciate you. Let's bring in CBS News political reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman, who's joining me now from outside that courthouse in New York City. You were sitting in the courtroom, Katrina. Give us some color. What'd you see? What'd you hear?
Hi, Vlad. Great to be with you. It was a very different atmosphere in that courtroom today. You could almost feel how much more relaxed it was without the anticipation of Trump's arrival. But there were still all of the courtroom reporters there, the sketch artists. There was the usual photography spray, but this time they were shooting the screen with Trump and his attorney, Todd Blanche, on it. As you can see in that photo, they were sitting with American flags behind them. And Trump only seemed semi-interested during all this. He was looking down quite a bit, but then, really perked up when he heard the prosecution talking about the charges against him. And there really just was a gravity, though, to hearing Justice Marchand proclaim this sentence and also really imply that he would have wanted to impose a harsher sentence on Donald Trump if it wasn't for the strictures of the presidency, the office that Marchand said Trump is about to occupy. But he really emphasized that what's extraordinary is the protections that are afforded that office, not the occupant, he said.
Yeah. And so the question, of course, going forward is just sort of what this will mean larger, a bigger picture, Katrina, as an attorney, the idea that a president of the United States is now also a convicted felon. I know that we've normalized the president-elect over the course of the last 8 years, but this is really extraordinary. And we often use the word unprecedented, but this is unprecedented.
I mean, it really is, Vlad, in every way. And, what's extraordinary is that there are many jobs and things that a convicted felon cannot do in the United States. But we now have one who is going to be leading our country, even though a jury verdict had come in from this trial with these 34 counts finding Trump guilty, the American people still decided to elect him president. And what the sentencing does is it's a note of finality, branding him as a convicted felon just 10 days before inauguration.
All right, Katrina Kaufman, we appreciate you as always, my friend. Jessica Levinson, Weijia Jiang, all of you who've been contributing to our coverage of this extraordinary day in a New York City courtroom. Thank you all very much. I want to let our viewers know that we're also going to be getting audio from the courtroom soon, and we're going to bring that to you as soon as it comes in. Meanwhile, some other news to get to, including the stories that we've been following all day. This will include analysis on America Decides and the Daily Report, which you can catch now on Fridays. Did you know that, Ryan? I did. You can find it on Fridays now. Easy. America Decides is on at 5 p.m. Eastern, and the Daily Report starts at 6 Eastern. Okay, back to the news that we've been tracking all week, the apocalyptic scenes coming to us from Los Angeles as residents survey the damage left behind from several wildfires. But the threat is far from over as crews still struggle to contain the flames. We are live on the ground. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. All right, we want to bring you up to speed on those 5 major wildfires that are still burning in California at this hour. Officials say that the Kenneth fire is now being investigated as potential arson. This as some residents head back for the very first time since they were forced to flee.
I just got off the phone with somebody, and as you can see, there's nothing left. And I've been here for about an hour and a half, and I don't want to leave. It's home. So I really can't put it into words.
We each walked out with 2 pairs of clothing changes, and that's all that we have.
CBS News correspondent Tom Hansen has been following this story all week for us, and he joins me now to talk about this. So, Tom, before we talk about some of the voices and the folks that you've been speaking to, just bring us up to speed on where the fires are this morning and what you're seeing.
Yeah, well, we're just near the Eden fire, which is about burned 14,000 acres so far, 0% containment, so very much still an active situation. This is Altadena, which is near Pasadena. This is a residential area, a lot of middle-class people, and I do just want to give you an extent of what we're seeing on the ground here. As the sun comes up, we're getting a better scope of the damage just in this area. It's utter destruction, Vlad. It is jaw-dropping to see house after house just wiped off of the map. And honestly, based on this wreckage, you can get a sense of the ferocity of these flames. It is indistinguishable. You cannot see, you cannot figure out what is what within this rubble here. It's all just ash and rubble. The only thing I can really make out is an oven over here. Outside of that, it is pretty much just debris. And so that just tells you how ferocious these flames have been and how quick they moved through this area. Consider a wall of flames just tearing through this residential area. Now, based on what we've heard from residents, this neighborhood was lush, it was green, it was idyllic, a lot of middle-class people living here. It's going to be a long road for the people who choose to return. But people we've spoken to are saying they may just pick up and leave because they don't exactly know what to do in an environment like this where there's not much to come back to, Vlad.
Yeah, Tom, we were all remarking after your piece this morning on CBS Mornings when we listened to some of the voices of people who just were devastated by the loss and didn't know what to do. Those who came back to what was once a beautiful and thriving community and only returned to see rubble and smoldering embers. And I remember we all turned to each other and I said to Gail, I wonder if people are even going to want to build back in an area that is so susceptible now to climate change and to these devastating fires. Are you hearing more of that? People saying, you know what, they may just pick up and go completely?
Yeah, I mean, Dale Fielder is a perfect example of that. The guy that we interviewed yesterday, we met him at a shelter not too far away from here in Pasadena that was housing some 1,200 people who were in very similar circumstances, a lot of them from the Altadena area. People are frustrated with the fact that the fire crews didn't come fast enough, according to them, and they are pretty much at a loss. I think there's a profound sense of loss amongst entire communities, especially especially Altadena. And let me tell you, when you drive through this neighborhood, there are downed power lines everywhere. There are full blocks that are just completely wiped away from the flames. Occasionally, because as you know, these wildfires are somewhat fickle, there are homes that are still standing here and there, but that is the minority. This is a community that is deeply impacted by this, and it's still, from my vantage point, very hard to wrap my head around the fact that this is still an active fire because so much of this land has burned, and you kind of wonder what's left to use as fuel for the flames. But this fire is still expanding, 0% contained. And so a lot of people are saying, you know, if I don't have anything to return to, Lord only knows if I'm going to be able to insure a new home if I want to rebuild. It might be just time to pick up and leave. And that's a heartbreaking revelation for so many people here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Tom, let me ask you about something we were just reported as we were introducing you, which is what police are saying about the Kenneth fire, that an arrest has been made. What are you learning about that?
Yeah, well, what we're learning, according to the PIO and their Twitter account, is that they have come out and said that they have not been able to identify a definitive link to this individual who is in custody and the Kenneth fire. But obviously, those reports have been circulating. The Kenneth fire, about 35% contained. It's actually just north of that catastrophic wildfire that hit the Palisades that we've been covering throughout the week. You know, it's an area that is near some higher end communities, Hidden Hills, for example, Calabasas, those are in that area. So homes are certainly under threat there. But one shred of good news in all of this, Vlad, is that these powerful gusts, these Santa Ana winds, they appear to be calming down for now. And so fire crews will be able to use this weekend to really jump into action, do a lot of those airdrops and drop a ton of water where they can to try to fight the flames. But really, this is just a city that feels like it's on fire pretty much any which way you look, Vlad, at the current moment.
Yeah. Tom Hansen, thank you very much for what you've been doing all week long, bringing these stories to those of us who can only imagine the pain and suffering that people are going through. We appreciate it, my friend. Stay safe. All right, from fire to ice, a major winter storm is barreling through the southeast, bringing a dangerous mix of snow, wind, and freezing rain. Thousands of flights have already been delayed or outright canceled. And that was before a full-on ground stop was declared just a few hours ago at the Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta. CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry is live in Atlanta. Wow, Skylar, you know, Atlanta is not used. I mean, I know that in Atlanta, when they get a dusting, like schools close, people are talking about skidding on the roads because they're just not used to snow of any kind. But this looks like a scene in the Northeast here in New York City.
That's right. I moved from Washington, D.C., thinking I was going to escape all this snow down here to Atlanta, and boom, what do you know, inches of snow here on the ground. But I will say, after speaking with Department of Transportation communications officials, they say that what they experienced back in 2014, remember that snowmageddon, snowpocalypse event that essentially gridlocked this entire metro area? They say that they have learned from that, so much so that they have been treating grounds, interstates, roadways since Wednesday with brine mixtures, salt mixtures to try to make sure that everyone here is as safe as possible. And in the hours that we have been out here, relatively light on the interstate compared to what you would consider busy, right? During the commute into work in a busy area like Metro Atlanta. We're here in the Atlantic Station area, another busy part of the metro area. No cars, for the most part, have been on the roadway, and the ones that we have seen on the roads, fishtails, spinouts, in some instances of them being stuck on the sides of the roads. Officials say that they are concerned about what we will experience later on today. Once this snow melts a little bit, we're in the freezing rain, sleet portion of this winter event. Once this snow melts, they are concerned about what happens overnight as far as that freeze, then what will result of that sheet of ice over the roadways. They say that they are monitoring road conditions throughout the evening to ensure that everyone is as safe as possible. But it's not just here in Atlanta, Vlad. We have seen this winter weather event hit several states across the South. Just yesterday in Texas, we saw more than 1,500 flights out of Dallas-Fort Worth get canceled. We've seen significant weather in Arkansas, Oklahoma City, and now we're getting reports of snow and ice in North Carolina, Tennessee, and we expect this storm to continue to move up towards the mid-Atlantic region as well. And so, yes, the South, we are not typically accustomed to this snow, as you well know, but we anticipate that this will continue to be the case for the next 24 hours. And so officials in all of these areas have not only issued states of emergencies, but also say that they will be working around the clock to ensure that people are not only safe, but they have power and they have the resources that they need to get through this storm.
So let me ask you really quickly, Skylar, before we let you go, about this ground stop at the airport. What are you hearing about that?
Yeah, and so earlier today, what we have been paying attention to in terms of what the flight patterns have been doing, FlightAware said that more than 600 flights were canceled because of this weather event. Now, this full-on ground stop as crews work to de-ice these planes, clear these runways, and really try to wait this storm through and allow that to pass through so that they can take off efficiently, effectively, and most importantly, safely. And so we'll continue to monitor and see when that is lifted, how many flights are able to actually take off. We know that this is the busiest airport in the world, and so a lot of people hoping that they can make it to their respective destinations in a timely fashion. We'll see what happens once the weather clears out here in about the next hour or so as it relates to that heavy snow and freezing rain. We'll see if that lifts, picks up, and if flights are able to then get out in the next few hours.
All right, Skylar Henry for us in Atlanta. Thank you, Skylar. As we indicated earlier, we're standing by for some audio from inside the courtroom where President-elect Donald Trump was just sentenced in that hush money criminal case. We're going to bring it to you when we get it. Stay with us. This is CBS News 24/7. Nicolas Maduro was sworn in as the Venezuelan president this morning for the third time in what will be another 6-year term. Maduro was part of a contentious election in which results published by the opposition party showed leader Edmundo González Urrutia, who won by a large margin. Urrutia is currently in Spain after a Venezuelan federal judge issued an arrest warrant. Protests erupted in Venezuela and across the world yesterday in response to Maduro's impending third term. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado says she was briefly arrested during an anti-Maduro protest in Caracas yesterday. Troops allegedly shot at motorcycles that were transporting Machado. So there's a lot to unpack in this story, so I want to bring in Manuela Guerra-Fletcher. She's a correspondent for Caracol Television and joins me now from Bogota. Thanks so much for being with us. So walk us through this controversy and the dispute in the results and what some are suggesting is Maduro's power grab.
Yes, good morning, Vladimir. Well, we have to start with the campaign, which was marked by a lot of accusations of repression against the opposition. There was the invitation of several international observers that was revoked, including the European Union. Over 130 members of the campaign, the opposition campaign, were detained. So just to name a few things, this is the context in which we arrived at this election. And then election day went on normally, but when polls closed, the website with official results crashed. The access of opposition poll watchers to different polling stations was blocked. And there was basically radio silence until after midnight when the Maduro government gave the only result that we've heard from them so far, which is 51% of the votes for Maduro, 44% for Edmundo González, without a specific breakdown of these numbers, no breakdown by polling stations, by states, whereas the opposition, as you mentioned, was able to get a copy of the actas, which are basically the receipt that the voting machines print, and they were able to get 80% of them, over 80% of them. And as you say, they suggest that Edmundo González Urrutia won this election by a landslide.
Fletcher, thank you for that breakdown for us. We appreciate it. Thank you. New data released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics show that the United States added 256,000 jobs in the month of December. The unemployment rate came in at 4.1%. This is the last full jobs report to fall under the Biden administration. I want to bring in CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady to talk more about this report. So let's first talk about today's report, and then I want to get a sense from you on the overall jobs data over the course of the last 4 years.
Okay, so today, huge, huge, huge number. Okay, we were expecting 155,000. You got 256,000. So that was a really big surprise. At the headline level, that is a strong labor market. But you know me, I always like to double click.
I know.
Because where the jobs are coming from is important.
Okay.
We lost 13,000 in manufacturing. Those are high paying jobs. We gained a lot in the travel and leisure sector and hospitality, and we gained a lot in retail. Both of those sectors gained over 40,000 jobs. This was December, Vlad. So those are seasonal holiday jobs. Those are not necessarily full-time roles that are going to continue throughout the year. And so we've also talked a lot about how people with specialized skill sets, they have had a really hard time getting back into the labor market. So when you look at today's report, really great top-line number, but where the jobs are coming from are more of those lower paying jobs.
So do you expect that trend to continue, that people in manufacturing who are highly skilled laborers are going to find it increasingly difficult to find work?
Potentially, though, of course, a lot of the policies that the president-elect is talking about are designed to bring some of that manufacturing here. Of course, that takes time, though.
All right, so let's assess the Biden job, just specifically on jobs. From when he took office to today, how would you describe it and how would you analyze it?
So look, I think it was a strong labor market that we ended with. I mean, the unemployment rate was over 6% when he took office. You have to put that into context, though, that he came in the middle of COVID and the pandemic when a lot of those jobs were away. The unemployment rate today was 4.1%. So again, you look at the top line, strong performance, you double click, he started from a low base, and now we're ending here. But yeah, it's just, I think that sort of, okay, but people are still in these highly specialized sectors struggling a little bit.
Yeah, all right. Kelly O'Grady, always great to have you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Have a nice weekend. All right, we're standing by from audio from inside the courtroom where the president-elect was just sentenced in that hush money case. Stay with us. Getting some audio from inside President-elect Donald Trump's hush money sentencing. The president-elect has received the sentence of an unconditional discharge in the criminal hush money case out of New York City. Let's play a little bit of that.
By pending court proceedings or ongoing sentence-related obligations. But imposing this sentence ensures that finality. Sentencing the defendant permits this court to enter judgment, to cement the defendant's status as a convicted felon while he pursues whatever appeals he intends to pursue. And it gives full effect and respect to the jury's verdict while preserving the defendant's ability to govern. The people therefore recommend that this court impose a sentence of an unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. I very, very much disagree with much of what the government just said about this case, about the legitimacy of what happened in this courtroom during the trial, and about President Trump's conduct fighting this case from before it was indicted, to while it was indicted, to the jury's verdict, and even to this day. What the government just said presupposes something that we disagree with very much, which was that this was an appropriate case to be brought. It was not. This case, without a doubt, knowing everything we know about the timing of the investigation, the fact that multiple prosecutors looked at the fact of this case, including prosecutors within the district attorney's office in New York County, and made a decision not to bring charges. As the court knows, shortly after President Trump announced his intention to run for re-election, this case was started for what amounted to a third time, which brings us ultimately to where we are today. A lot of what the government just said presupposes that this case is legally appropriate and that the charges that were brought by the people were consistent with the laws of New York. Again, we very much disagree with that. And as everybody has been noted, because it's true, we certainly intend on appealing that. And it's not, by the way, just counsel and President Trump that feels that way. There's many, many, many legal experts that share the same views that I just said, which is that legally this case should not have been brought, both based on the facts that were established at trial and also on the legal basis for which they were brought. But it's also not just the legal experts, not just counsel, and not just President Trump, but the majority of the American people also agree that this case should not have been brought. I mean, the interesting thing about the fact that there was a trial for the first time in our history, a criminal trial during an election season, is that the American voters got a chance to see and decide for themselves whether this is the kind of case that should have been brought. And they decided. And that's why in 10 days, President Trump is going to assume the office of the President of the United States. And certainly we're here for the court to sentence President Trump to an unconditional discharge. And for that, it's a very sad day. It's a sad day for President Trump and his family and friends. But it's also, in counsel's view, a sad day for this country, because this was a case, without a doubt, that was brought by a district attorney who promised that he would go after President Trump if elected, and felt like he had to go through with that promise. And so that's sad. And I hope, and I know that President Trump shares this view, that this will never happen again in this country. And so we certainly understand where we are today. We very much intend on pursuing an appeal of this verdict and what happened during this investigation. And we certainly believe that the only appropriate sentence, if one's to be imposed at all, which we very much believe it shouldn't be, and that the case should be dismissed, is a sentence of an unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Would your client like to be heard?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. This has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. This is a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was, from what I read and from what I hear, inappropriately handled before he got there. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney, and that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did. It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent. Part of the records that we're talking about, they're saying, I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they said, was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense. In other words, that legal fees or legal expense were put down as legal expense by accountants. They weren't put down by me. They were put down by accountants. I didn't call them construction, concrete work. I didn't call them electrical work. I didn't call them anything. They called a legal fee or a legal expense. And for this, I got indicted. It's incredible, actually. Now, if you look, my attorney alluded to it, the top legal scholars and legal pundits in this country, the ones that are quoted all the time on television, that are making their views felt, and highly respected people, have said, everyone, virtually everyone that I know of, haven't seen any to the contrary, not one. And none of these people are not exactly friends of mine, to put it mildly. But they all said this is a case that should have never been brought. It's an injustice of justice. Very respected Jonathan Turley, Andy McCarthy, Judge David Rifkin, a wonderful man who just passed away, by the way, Greg Jarrett, Ellie Honig from CNN, of all places. CNN said that, Paul Ingratian, Alan Dershowitz. They all said this is not a case that should be brought. It's Now think about it. Legal expenses are down as legal expenses, and I get indicted for business records. Everybody should be so accurate. It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far of any Republican candidate in history, and won, as you know, all 7 swing states, won conclusively all 7 swing states, and won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes. And they've been watching your trial, so they understood it. I wasn't allowed to use the lawyer-client privilege or the reliance on counsel. I had a lawyer that made this deal, and he admitted that. And he was also a totally discredited person. We weren't allowed to use the information from the Southern District that totally discredited him. It wasn't allowed to be put in. And that was terrible, unbelievable. And this is a man who's got no standing. He's been disbarred on other matters, unrelated. And he was allowed to talk as though he were George Washington, but he's not George Washington. He shouldn't have been allowed. The Southern District did a book of approximately 28 pages where I've never seen anything like it. They excoriated him. You wouldn't let it be put into evidence. So he was able to testify as a witness, and I think it's a disgrace to the system. I was under a gag order. I'm the first president in history that was under a gag order where I couldn't talk about aspects of the case that are very important. I guess I'm still under, so probably I won't do it now. I assume I'm still under a gag order. But the fact is that I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talked about business records, and the business records were extremely accurately counted. I had nothing to do with them. That was done by an accountant or a bookkeeper who I think gave very credible testimony and was corroborated by everybody that was asked. And with all that's happening in our country today, with a city that's burning to the ground, one of our largest, most important cities burning to the ground, with wars that are uncontrollably going on, with all of the problems of inflation and attacks on countries and all of the horrible things that are going on, I got indicted over calling a legal expense a legal expense. It was called a legal expense. I just want to say I think it's an embarrassment to New York, and New York has a lot of problems, but this is a great embarrassment. I believe that this and other cases that were brought, as you know, the DOJ is very much involved in this case. It's because that's the political opponent they're talking about. The DOJ is very involved. You have a gentleman sitting right there from the DOJ who was from the DOJ's office. He was also involved with the New York State Attorney General's case. And he went from there to here. He went around and did what he had to do. He got them to move on me. But in the meantime, I won the election in a massive landslide. And the people of this country understand what's gone on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare. Never happened to any extent like this, but never happened in our country before. And I'd just like to explain that I was treated very, very unfairly. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trump.
All right, so the headline, the president-elect says he was treated very unfairly. I want to bring back Jessica Levinson for more on this. She's a CBS News legal contributor and a professor at Loyola Law School. Jessica, I thought the most interesting of all the things that the president rambled on about with regards to his grievances, which are not new, we've heard Donald Trump express grievance at many, many things over the course of the last 8 years or so. But I thought what was interesting is he ran through a list of legal scholars who agreed with him that this was politically motivated. And I know that that doesn't hold any precedence in a court of law, but it is interesting that there are people, some of them very, very respected criminal legal minds, who agreed with the president that this trial, this case should have never been brought. What's your reaction to what he said on that audio?
So my reaction, one, is that we should be careful about making sure that all of those legal scholars really said this case should not have been brought. What I certainly have heard is that this is not a typical case that you would bring. That doesn't mean it's inappropriate. It means what's not typical about this. Typically speaking, the falsification of business records is a misdemeanor. Typically speaking, you don't kick it up to a felony. They did in this case. Why? Based on what, frankly, is a somewhat novel theory that the falsification of business records was committed in order to commit or conceal another crime. The jury was not asked to agree on what that other crime was. It might have been tax fraud. It might have been campaign finance violations. The jury had to come to a unanimous verdict, but not as to which other crime was being committed or concealed by virtue of the falsification of business records. So all of which is to say, is this the typical bread and butter case? Certainly falsification of business records cases are brought all of the time. Now, this particular set of facts and this particular theory is not brought all the time, is rare. That doesn't mean that it's inappropriate. It means it's not what we typically see. Is there something to the idea that people would not have been looking at this if we weren't talking about the former president of the United States? I think that is fair. I also think it is fair, and we talked about this with respect to people on the other side of the political aisle, to say once you look, even if you wouldn't have looked otherwise, there's no obligation to look away if you see wrongdoing.
And yet the president-elect has changed what he said about that payment to Stormy Daniels many, many times. If you recall, Jessica, originally he said he didn't know anything about it, that reporters should check with Michael Cohen. Then he ultimately admitted that he authorized that payment to Stormy Daniels. But here in this audio tape we just heard, he was talking about it in almost a different way, like that it wasn't a payment to a former porn star.
Right. He was saying this is a legal payment. It was logged as a legal payment. I don't know how else to say this other than obviously this is a different characterization than the one that we've previously heard. And we should be clear that the jury has spoken and found that there was the falsification of business records. The jury unanimously found that he was guilty on 34 felony counts. You do not find guilt on 34 felony counts if members of the jury think this was a legal payment for legal services.
All right, Jessica Levinson, always great to have your brilliant analysis, my friend. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend. That does it for me, folks. Next up, Elizabeth Cook is live from San Francisco with all the breaking news from coast to coast. Again, sending our love to the people of Los Angeles. We love you. We appreciate you. We see you. I'll see you on Monday.